Members of the University of Connecticut student government resign because they are white, and they call for new elections and minority leadership. So, if what you really want is all minority governance, why bother with elections at all? Just hand all the power to non-whites immediately and do away with elections, which are nothing more than racist holdovers from white supremacist forms of government like democracy. This is the thing they never do see, isn't it? I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is the Dr. Duke Show. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we start in Connecticut, where white guilt has compelled students to step down from their elected positions that make up UConn's student government. And the thing that we find so troubling about this is how utterly racist they are. I mean, what these white people who got elected are telling you is, look, qualifications, hard work, campaigns, qualifications, abilities, skills, interest, they don't matter. We just need to have black faces up here. And notice again the consequence I said in the teaser there. If you really believe that you were duly elected, you ran for office, your peers elected you, I'm assuming that even African American students voted in these elections, so some of them voted for you as well, I imagine. The fact that you're going to resign now because you're not black, and you think by doing so this makes you a hero, it does not. And furthermore, you undermined democratic elections by doing this. You're basically saying that any black person out there with a pulse would be better than me, and who's never been elected, may not even want to run, may not even be interested in student government, but they must take those positions, whether they want them or not, to validate my social justice posturing and virtue signaling. It's an embarrassment. I would argue it's racist. The only thing that's going to get these kids is if you could actually call them racist, because they think they're not being racist by engaging in racist behavior. The color of your skin qualifies you more than anything. And let's have new elections. In fact, let's keep having elections until the roster of student government is all black and looks the way we think it should. The degree to which UConn, which like any other major university is obsessed with childish, puerile racial identity politics, has not been able to convince these kids, because maybe UConn doesn't know it itself. But when you are doing this, when you are using your whiteness as an excuse to stand down from a responsibility you took on yourself to allow non-white voices to participate, the only way you can make that happen is to do away with elections. And that's another implication of what you're after here. Not only is this racist, it's anti-democracy, it's anti-freedom, it's anti-liberty, it is crass, and it doesn't make you a hero. It makes you sad and pathetic, like the sad little pathetic college you attend.
All right, let's get to the story with the president and the vice president of the UConn student government resigning. And it actually started with Vice President Alex Oates. She said that she stepped down to make room for Black, Indigenous, and people of color to step into these leadership roles. And like you said, by her doing this, if she had any inkling that this was going to be some sort of I need to step down for the black person before she ran, you knew that this actually came about because of everything that's been happening in the country. So she took a look at herself and said, what is it that I can do as my poor white person to make others feel better? And this is what she thought was correct. But like you said, it's also, if you're going to force Black, Indigenous, or people of color to take these positions, isn't that exactly the same thing? You're forcing them to do it. Not they could have run, just like you said. They could have been vice president or president or run for something else, but that's not what we do anymore. And
the subtle undercurrent of this is that I'm a white person. I ran and competed and won. Those poor kids can't do it.
So now it's okay for me to step aside.
Well, they can't.
They can't.
They're not capable of it because culture's so racist. We're all so racist. Or they're just, they can't get elected on their own.
Well, and this is what Oates had said. I feel that it's my duty to step down from my position to make space for BIPOC. And that's the new the new thing they're using. BIPOC, meaning Black, Indigenous, and people of color, voices to truly rise and be heard. It is my responsibility to make space, not to create an echo. And then Oates even encouraged her peers to follow her lead. And so she's, not only her president, what's his name? Joshua Crow, he stepped down, but she said that she encouraged her peers that any white member in the whole student government at UConn should step down.
So in other words,
so that
she's
it can be filled.
targeting politicians who are white.
Yeah,
and
so
it's their
yeah.
whiteness that should disqualify
And
them.
she says, I am asking all members of USG to truly consider their intent in holding their positions and to urge everyone to truly think if they are making space for the voices that need to be heard right now. I call upon the senators and executive boards to consider also stepping down to make space for BIPOC voices.
Right, and so maybe it would be really neat if we had separate water coolers that people could drink from, and maybe the entire school, maybe we should have people sit in the back of the bus.
This is
as
all
a statement.
exactly. This is exactly
this
what
is
they're saying.
absolutely absurd. And the smug the idea that she's doing this as a sacrifice, it's not a sacrifice.
It's her responsibility and her duty.
Did anyone in the country know who this clown was before she resigned? Now she's national news.
But
right?
here's the funny part of it. So the president, Joshua Crow, also stepped down.
To be replaced by?
Hold on. So remember, we're stepping down to have it so BIPOC members. Well, of course, he was replaced with Will Shadd, who is a white male. But apparently, this is only temporary, and they're going to immediately schedule elections so that students can vote on new leaders. But they can't. They can only vote from a certain pool of leaders. Because if you're white, get out.
Here's the thing. You're Will Shadd. Is that his name?
Will Shadd.
Well, you're Will Shadd, and you ran. You weren't part of this, right? You were not participating in this pity me because I'm white festival and make me a hero stuff. And so now everybody else resigned. You're the president. What choice do you have now? I mean, can you imagine what would happen to Will Shadd if he said, "Hey, thank you two. I am now the president."
Yeah.
Can you imagine they would run him out of rail? The only thing he can do is resign now. In other words, they're not just deciding this from themselves. They're forcing these decisions. They're backing this poor Will Shadd into a position where he has no choice now but to resign as well, or the mob would get him. And let's just go further. You're student government. Why aren't you instead of demanding everybody else on your student government do this, why don't you demand the chancellor do it? Why don't you demand the vice chancellor, the provost? Why don't you demand the deans do it? You run a stupid little student governance organization. What about the people who actually govern the university? Why aren't you asking them to call down? Why aren't you demanding that your chancellor stands up and does the exact same thing you've done? Because that's the position that matters.
I am quite frankly relieved because George Washington University has gone full woke, just like George Washington wanted them to do. So the school's Office of Diversity released the Solidarity Resource Syllabus, and it's basically a giant reading list focusing on racism in the current United States here. And they say that there are 126 books you need to read on racism, which actively and effectively combat injustice. Now, among this list is a book called Conservatism and Racism, and Why in America They Are the Same.
Yep.
Look at that book. Man, I just want to read that right now. So it's actually a book that was from 2010, and the author is Robert Smith, who's from San Francisco State University, and he teaches political science there. Now, as the book states, conservatism, as a philosophy and ideology, is and always has been hostile to the aspirations of Africans in America, incompatible with the struggle for freedom and equality. And repeatedly I was asked, this is all stated in the book, repeatedly I was asked, the author, are you saying that conservatism is racism? That all conservatives are racist? Aren't there black conservatives? Are they racist? My answer to most of these questions was a qualified yes.
Of course it is. And the funny thing about this is that if you try to recommend a book on any college campus, like Jonah Goldberg's book from about 10 years ago, Liberal Fascism, that suggests with a big thick book, lots and lots of documentation.
Too many words.
Goldberg's book, they wouldn't read a book that long. Goldberg's book really, I think, successfully demonstrates that the most violent and genocidal movements in the last 100 years have been liberal left-wing, socialism being a left-wing phenomenon. That the real illiberal people in the world, the real fascists, have been liberals, right? Liberals carried to extremes. You would never in a million years be able to suggest that book or even try to defend it on a college campus. But some small little volume that argues to be conservative is to be racist is nonsense. And by the way, he ignores the question again. What about, and I assume by conservatives he's meaning Republicans, right? I assume that's what he means, given that most Republicans down through the ages have been conservatives. Not all of them, but many of them. What about the fact that it was conservative Republicans who pushed the civil rights movement, not Democrats? What about the fact that it was conservatives who, a conservative like Richard Nixon, who created the EPA? What about the fact that you've got conservatives who stood athwart of the Ku Klux Klan and the Confederacy, the slaveholding nations, the slaveholding states that were almost unilaterally Democrat? What is that if conservatives, by simply definition, are racist because they stand in the way of progress and equality? Then what do you do about the record of the Democrat Party? You're the one who's making this a liberal conservative fight. You with your qualified yeses.
Well, according to Smith, because today he gave a response, about what's happening this year, he said the book is academic in nature rather than a partisan polemic. He defended his book, of course, why wouldn't he want sales? But he says it's a historical, philosophical, and empirical study that's more useful today than when it was published 10 years ago. So, wow, it's just becoming more useful. He says, I think the book is useful to conservatives as well as liberals, and in light of Trump's blend of traditional and paleo-conservatism is even more relevant today.
It's not enough just to be racist. You have to be non-racist in ways that support Democrat and liberal institutions, right? So your racism, your anti-racism is only really valid if it transfers to voting for us, keeping yourself on that African-American plantation. Keep yourself on that Democrat plantation, people. That's what real anti-racism means to people like our professor here and what's going on at George Washington University.
Well, I'm very excited about this story because we're talking about English departments and how English departments clearly are all about solidarity. I'm sure you can attest. It's why the English department at Rutgers University announced a list of anti-racist directives and initiatives for the upcoming fall and spring semesters, including an effort to de-emphasize traditional grammar rules. Who needs words? Rebecca Walkowitz is the English department chair at Rutgers University, and she sent an email to faculty, staff, and students on Juneteenth, which we know is when we celebrate the emancipation of from slavery in the U.S., and the email was titled, Department Actions in Solidarity with Black Lives Matter. The email states the ongoing and future initiatives that the English department has planned as being a way to contribute to the eradication of systemic inequities facing Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC. One of the initiatives is described as incorporating critical grammar into our pedagogy. Under a so-called critical grammar pedagogy, the email states, this approach challenges the familiar dogma that writing instruction should limit emphasis on grammar, sentence-level issues so as not to put students from multilingual, non-standard academic English backgrounds at a disadvantage. Instead, it encourages students to develop a critical awareness of the variety of choices available to them with regard to micro-level issues in order to empower them and equip them to push against biases based on written accents.
For the love of God. Did you hear that vomitorium of jargon-ridden liberal nonsense? Look, this ties perfectly into everything we've done. Notice the first story where you got white kids resigning as student government leaders because of their privilege. They're, without even knowing it, they're stereotyping, they're scapegoating, they're making decisions for blacks rather than letting blacks decide to run on their own and minorities. Then you go to the second story here, which was what again?
George Washington University.
Yes, George Washington University. And what were they doing? Making assumptions about using Black Lives Matter to funnel kids away from conservative politics towards the Democrat Party. The entire thing was one big, great political power scam. And now you have the same thing here. This is even perhaps more egregious. What this Mrs. Walkowitz, Professor Walkowitz, is this like Howard Wolowitz's mother? This Mrs. Walkowitz, Dr. Walkowitz, right? Speaking on behalf of blacks everywhere. And here's the thing I want to ask, because apparently standardized English is something that white people are born with. Do you understand what BS that is? When you listen to little kids talk, do they speak the King's English?
Oh, my son does. Oh, yeah, totally.
Well, that kid's going to have problems. I'm telling you, though, No one speaks the King's English. It has to be taught to all of us. White people are not more genetically prone to not putting prepositions at the end of a sentence than black people are. This has nothing to do with your race, and yet Walkowitz makes it all about race. The implication is that young white kids are born speaking proper English with their pinkies extended at T. No, white kids are every bit as much need to be taught proper language as black or Hispanic kids are. There's no difference here. What you're simply trying to say is that that's white language, right? Grammar and syntax and capitalization and punctuation, that's all white culture, right? And so things like Ebonics, let's not tax African American students like we tax white kids, used to anyway, to learn how to speak correctly. Let's defer to the fact that because they don't do it, they must not be able. It's so hard for black people to be able to speak correctly. It's so hard and so culturally scary for black people to master sentence structure. So we're going to tell black people, keep speaking ghetto, keep speaking jive. And that's okay, because only white kids speak correctly. And I teach 98% of my students at my university are white kids. They can't speak correct English. They cannot write correct English.
So the English department, and this is something for mom and dad, if you're paying attention at home, or, student, if you want to be an English major, or simple fact that you do have to take classes in the English department, take a look at where your English department puts priority on. So since 2012, the English department has had a committee on bias awareness and prevention. And the committee got together and they decided they're going to emphasize awareness and prevention towards a role emphasizing culture change. And here are all the initiatives, not even all of them, I cut some of them out, that they plan to implement for this fall and spring. They will require all fall 2020 English instructors to attend at least one workshop remotely on how to have an anti-racist classroom. They are organizing 2 teach-ins focused on Black Lives Matter, anti-racism, police brutality, and prison reform. Again, remember, English department.
English department.
Develop an internship that is devoted to decolonizing the Writing Center. The Writing Center is for anyone on campus to go use, and it's made up of mostly English majors. So they're being taught, and then they're going to teach you, and you may have no care about any of the BS that they're doing. But they're going to be decolonizing the Writing Center. They are also going to launch a program about art and protest. They're going to run 14 courses in the fields of African American literature.
So here's my thing. It's not an English department anymore. This is what's happening to the humanities. Within 10 years, English, history, philosophy, art history, all of that stuff is going to be this. Notice what Rutgers is telling you. We are not an English department. We are not teaching you grammar. We're not teaching you how to write correctly. We're not teaching you the great books. We're not teaching you the classics. We're not teaching you the dead white males. We are going to use our money, our time, your requirement to be in our classes to sociologically change you. That's all that this is. And we're going to hire more of it. We're going to double down on it. We're going to give you 14 sections of African American lit and none of anything else. We're going to hire only professors who teach non-Western, non-white cultures. We're going to bully you and we're going to berate you and we're going to break you down until you are exactly the kind of person we are, which is good for nobody.
It's that special time for some real education. In March 1974, Chinese farmers digging a well 20 miles east of Xi'an discovered a pit containing 6,000 life-size terracotta statues. The site was found to be the burial place of Emperor Qin. Archaeologists then uncovered a 20-square-mile compound, including some 8,000 terracotta soldiers, along with numerous horses and chariots, a pyramid mound marking the emperor's tomb, remains of a palace, offices, storehouses, and stables. A second pit was found with cavalry and infantry units, and a third pit contained high-ranking officers and chariots. A fourth pit remained empty, suggesting that the burial pit was left unfinished at the time the emperor died.
Yeah, this is kind of a neat little story that we're used to people digging up stuff from the ground, like little fragments of dinosaur bones or, broken pottery, shattered walls of what used to be a once great civilization. Imagine being an archaeologist and uncovering an entire life-size standing city. right? Where everybody's upright, where you got the horses, you got soldiers, you've got everything where you want it, and nothing's broken. It is considered one of, if not the greatest archaeological find of the last 150 years. Take a look at some of these pictures. All of those gaps are filled with the terracotta soldiers. To give you literally what you have here is a functional Chinese army for Emperor Qin. This is the Qin dynasty. By the way, this is the Qin dynasty, the very first one to unify all of China. It only survived for about 50 years. The Qin and his son were the only ones who survived it before the next dynasty took over. But boy, what would you rather have? Imagine you believed what the ancient Chinese believed about the afterworld, or what the ancient Egyptians believed about the afterworld. What would you rather have to go marching into the afterworld? A couple of mummies of cats and your favorite golden stuff when you were alive, or 8,000 soldiers? Take a look at some closer images there. You can see these soldiers. Go to the next one. There you go. And the thing about these soldiers is that it has been determined that all 8,000 soldiers have their own unique features. In other words, this is not one artist doing knockoffs of the same face. That each of the 8,000 soldiers has a unique facial identity. The differences in the kind of armor that they wear, the weapons that they wield, facial hair or no facial hair. It's a staggering accomplishment. Go to the next picture, please. You can see there's a full cavalry division there, too. You've got all sorts of horses that are done with radical individuality. No two horses are the same. You can get a sense here of how detailed the armor that they wear is. You get a sense of the uniqueness of their faces. And for terracotta, right, the horses there, you get a sense of this. Go to the next one. Get a really good sense there. Here's a chariot, a coach being drawn by horses. These look to be actually dress horses for rituals and or parades, not necessarily fighting. You can see the chariot that's being pulled. You can even see the little umbrella to keep the sun off those who are riding. And so this is a really remarkable culture and a really remarkable cultural achievement from the 3rd century BC. From about 250 BC down to about 212 BC, you have the Qin dynasty. You have the Emperor Qin, who marched bravely into the afterworld with all of his soldiers with him.
And there you go. As always, you can follow us on Facebook and Parler. And if you have a question for the Friday Q&A, visit freedomproject.com/askduke or send us a message on social media. Don't forget, the Dr. Duke Show is offered on more than 12 podcast platforms such as Apple, Stitcher, and Spotify. Simply subscribe, and then please consider leaving us that coveted 5-star review to keep the show growing. Now we're going to wrap things up with the fun fact of the day. One of the last good things, evidently, to come out of Rutgers University was James Gandolfini, who got a BA in communications. And while in college, he actually worked as a bouncer in an on-campus pub.
And that's going to do it for the show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie. And until next time, what about it, my friends?